Like and subscribe right now, or this spider will crawl on your face while you're sleeping.
Oh, Canada, my friendly, safe, and inviting homeland. Sweet as maple syrup and the land of please and thank you. Canadians are known for so much in a sense that the nation of peace, order, and good government has acquired a reputation as a rather dull society where nothing interesting ever happens. Like many of the world's nations, Canada is often the subject of gross stereotypes. One of the most sparsely populated places on the globe, Canada is often seen as a frozen wasteland of moose, Mounties, and maple syrup. But beyond the funny accent, there are few places better on earth to live, as Canadians are consistently rated in the highest categories for quality of life. In fact, Canada is a complex country where there have been several periods of serious controversy. Like everywhere else in the world, Canada has a history that, although fascinating, is often not flattering. Yet by telling the full story, you get the full picture. So today, let's take a look at some of the things you never knew about Canada, and you'll understand why Canadians don't want you to know these things either. Let's go. Number 10. The Beothuk Tribe. The Beothuk are a now extinct indigenous tribe that was based on the island of Newfoundland. Unlike most North American native people, the Beothuk have no desire to interact with the Europeans and try to avoid the contact as much as possible. As the Europeans settled primarily along the coastline of the island, the Beothuk began to move further inland. Eventually, as the number of settlers increased, so did the demand for natural resources. The technologically superior and better armed Europeans took to the regions rich in resources, which pushed the Beothuk back into regions away from the coastal resources that were vital to their diet and well-being. Starvation inevitably followed, as well as the rampant spread of the European diseases and increased hostility. In the end, it was too much for the Beothuk, and the population was eventually wiped out. Their numbers were estimated to be as high as 3,000 at the beginning of the 18th century, although many believe their population was no more than 500 to 700.
Before we move on, I've got a little challenge for you that will take just 5 seconds to complete. So here's the deal. You just leave a like on this video, smash that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell and you get 25 years of amazing logic. Try it. It really works.
Number 9. Slavery in Canada. Like America, Canada was built in part by slave labor, centered mainly in New France, which is now known as the province of Quebec. Thousands of African and Aboriginal people were sold into bondage, either bought from traders overseas, traded between the French and the British, or even sold by Aboriginal people themselves, who had little other use for those captured in wars between various tribes. Between 1671 and 1833, around 4,000 slaves were held captive in Canada, 2/3 of which who were First Nation people, and the rest mainly African. Most of those held in captivity were very young, between the ages of 14 and 18 years old. All were forced in to serve the political and societal elite of the times, and although their treatment was much better than those endured by the American slaves, they still enjoyed little freedom and endured the pain of being separated from their families and culture. The main reason for slave trade in Canada did not balloon to the proportions seen in the United States was the principal difference between industry and the two nations at the time. Canada's main source of income was the fur trade, an industry served primarily by hunters, and Canada's farming industry was not focused on exportation, unlike the massive cotton industry in the United States. Slaves were also very expensive during this time period, and even an unskilled slave cost as much as 4 times as an average person's annual income. That said, the aberrant practice did exist in Canada and affected thousands, leaving an often unmentioned scar on the nation's psyche. Number 8. Concentration camps during World War I. In times of war, the paranoia of a ruling government can almost be boundless. During World War I, Canada's leaders fell into this mentality and imprisoned thousands of enemy aliens in concentration camps dotting the country. Most of those who were rounded up were Eastern European origin, mostly Ukrainians, although the Poles, Italians, Russians, Turks, Jews, Austrians, Romanians, and many others were subjected to the camps as well. Around 8,000 people suffered brutality and hardships under Canadian law. Those who fell under the suspicious eye of the government at the time had all of their valuables confiscated and were sent to the most distant parts of the country to be held prisoner and used for forced labor. They were even forced to build the very camps in which they were being imprisoned. Afterwards, they were used for labor, building railroads, clear-cutting forests, or mining, and afforded very little in the way of food or rest. Escape attempts, riots, and suicides plagued the camps due to the conditions which were almost unendurable. Number 7. Genocide of the Aboriginal people. Canada's first Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald, is a historical figure akin to the founding fathers of the United States. He has had many monuments erected in his honor and even adorns the Canadian $10 bill. However, many don't know that he instigated a campaign of forced starvation against the Aboriginal peoples of Canada during his term as the head of the newly founded nation. Under his tenure, he oversaw a government policy to withhold food from the Aboriginal peoples until they moved into dictated reservations. Even after they complied, their food supply was stored in ration houses and still denied to them, left to rot as the people starved. The man himself was known as a virulent racist and alcoholic, yet his views on Aboriginals were as complicated as the politics of the time. Paradoxically, he also enacted legislation to extend the vote to the First Nation people under his reign as the country's leader. To many Canadians, he is a hero and a shining example of good governance. To the many Aboriginals who have inherited the tales of misery he was responsible for from their elders, he is simply a monster. Recently, pressure from the First Nation leaders within Canada has caught the eye of the United Nations, who have sent an envoy to examine the historical treatment of their people in Canada. Number 6. Language laws. French and English are the official languages of Canada. Approximately 22% of the population speaks French. 58.4% speaks English. The majority of the French population lives in the province of Quebec, making it a predominantly French-speaking region. In 1977, a law was passed in Quebec to recognize French as its official provincial language. The law is commonly referred to as Bill 101, and it enforces the promotion of French within Quebec. The enforcement of the bill is very controversial. For example, the French language must be in bigger letters and be more pronounced in the commercial signs. There are even inspectors assigned to verify that the law is being adhered to. And they may go as far as to shut down a business until its owners comply with this law. Number 5. Louis Riel. Louis Riel was a Canadian politician who is today considered the founder of the province of Manitoba. The land was previously owned by the Hudson's Bay Company, which sold it to the government of Canada in 1869. The mostly Métis, aka the people of Aboriginal and European descent, were increasingly feeling marginalized and looked to Louis Riel, who was a Métis himself, to represent them as their leader as he negotiated Manitoba's entry into Canada. Based on the success in Manitoba, Métis leaders in the province of Saskatchewan later called upon Riel to represent them as well. Instead of negotiating with the government in this case, Riel organized a military resistance which led to conflict. Realizing that Riel was now attempting to establish a sovereign Métis nation, the government sought and captured Riel, who was hanged for treason in 1885. To this day, Riel is revered for his stance on the protection of Catholics, Native rights, and the rights of French-speaking minority of Western Canada. Number 4. Seal hunting. As nice as Canada is known to be, the seal hunt is likely the best known controversy on this list. The roots of the hunt can be traced to the first European settlements. Seal oil was in high demand as a lubricant, and of course, seals were wanted for their fur. Hundreds of thousands have been killed throughout the centuries to meet this demand. Since the official ban on seal imports by the EU and Russia, the demand for seal products has plummeted. Despite this, Canada is the highest seal hunting quota in the world, which has drawn international commendation. PETA and stars such as Sir Paul McCartney, Leonardo DiCaprio, and Gwen Stefani have drawn international attention to Canada's high quota in spite of dwindling demand. Number 3. The FLQ crisis. Canada is likely the last place you would expect to be under martial law because of homegrown Canadian terrorists. Well, it did happen. In the French-speaking province of Quebec in 1970, local politician Pierre Laporte and British diplomat James Cross were kidnapped by French-speaking separatist group Front de Libération du Québec, aka FLQ. Later, Laporte was found dead, stuffed in the trunk of a car, and Cross was released through negotiation. Hundreds of people were arrested and detained without trial as the military took control with sweeping powers primarily in the city of Montreal. Human rights were greatly diminished as troops raided buildings and patrolled the streets. After the successful negotiation of Cross's release, the War Measures Act was lifted. The act had enabled martial law to be declared, which had a significant support from both English and French-speaking populations who were appalled by the FLQ's violent tactics. At the time, the Prime Minister who invoked the act was none other than Pierre Trudeau, father of the current Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Before we go further, we'd like to thank our subscriber Josh Anderson from Nashville for sending us the thumbnail for today's video. And now, let's get back to the dark stuff Canadians have been hiding from the rest of the world. Let's go. Number 2. The Canadian healthcare. Wait, Canadian healthcare? Universal government-funded healthcare has been the source for pride for Canadians since its inception in 1960s. It's a social service accessible and free for all Canadian citizens. So where is the controversy or dark history here? Well, the system is very controversial, as Canada has been consistently ranked amongst the worst in first world in terms of wait times for surgeries and specialists. Furthermore, if you have deeper pockets and are willing to pay for the specialist, you can't in Canada. This leaves some critically ill, time-sensitive patients with little choice but to wait a very long time for service or leave the country for care elsewhere. Number 1. Residential school systems. Perhaps one of the darkest periods of Canadian history was during the adoption of the residential school systems within Canada. Approximately 150,000 Aboriginal Canadian children were uprooted from their homes and forced into English schools where they lived until completion of their educations. It was nothing more than an attempt to aggressively assimilate the native population into the European-based Canadian majority. Centuries-old languages, cultures, names, and traditions were lost, and abuse was rampant as well as malnutrition. The first schools were established in the early 1880s. The last school didn't close its doors until 1996. To this day, the country is facing lawsuits for abuse and neglect. Prime Minister Stephen Harper officially apologized on behalf of the nation in 2008. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching today's video. We hope that you enjoyed it, and please stay tuned for some more great content.